Hi, welcome to Actualol. I'm Jon Purkis. These are some of the board games I've been playing lately, and I'm going to tell you what I think of them. I'll put links to where you can buy them in the description below. Up first is Hail Hydra. This is a social deduction game with a Marvel theme. It's quite a simple game, but a little bit more depth than you would get in something like Resistance and Werewolf. And that's what fascinated me about it. I'm not personally a huge fan of Marvel films or comics. I don't mind them. But really I was interested in the way the game played. And because it kind of bridges the gap between a social deduction game where you really just vote on who to kill or whether to pass or fail a mission, and a slightly deeper game such as Battlestar Galactica or Dark Moon, where you're actually having a bit more of a control over how you influence the game. And that's because the game comes with these cards. So everyone will be given a role at the start of the game, and if you're bad, you want to tank the missions, and if you're good, you want it to succeed. And the missions are basically to kill these villains. You'll go through these villains one at a time. They all have different special powers, which give you a bit of extra thing to think about. But ultimately what's going to happen is everyone's going to take it in turns to play 1, 2, or 3 of these cards. And they're either going to be blue, which is plus numbers, or red, which is minus numbers. So the good guys generally want to play the good ones, and the bad guys generally want to play the bad ones. It has a bit more agency. You can decide what you're doing, and I love that it's forcing players to maybe do things that they don't want to be doing. This also happens in Dark Moon and Secret Hitler. This idea that you are forced by the hand of cards you're given to play a certain way, and then you're desperately trying to persuade the rest of the group that you are actually good, but you just only had a hand of bad cards. I really love that the game throws you into those situations. Playing those cards helps players deduce who might be good and bad, because if I play 2 bad cards, and then there's only 2 bad cards when they're all revealed, they get shuffled up and revealed. And this is very similar to the way cards are played in Battlestar Galactica. And I think it works really nicely there. It works really nicely here because you don't know who played what, but you have an idea. You know that this person played 2 cards, that person played 3, and there's only 2 bad cards in there. Was it them, or was it 2 different bad people playing 1 card each? There's not loads of information, but there's enough to have some discussion, create some accusations, and that's where these social deduction games really thrive. And I think Hail Hydra does that really well. It's a very simple conceit. There's not many rules, and you're straight into discussing what happened and why you've managed to not beat Kingpin this time, and actually he's destroying the city. So you've got a health of your city on the main board, and when it gets to 0, the bad guys win. So the good guys are trying to kill enough villains to win the game. Where they've made the game a bit more interesting as well is that each character has an ability, and they can use it once and then it's done for the whole game. So they're quite strong abilities. And it even says on the back of the card how you might use it if you're good or if you're bad. So I like that the game is coaching you a little bit, because often with social deduction games, it can be quite nerve-wracking for a newbie to understand the dynamic of a game. I've had a lot of fun with this. I think it works a bit better with 7 or 8 players because there's more bad guys and it's just a bit easier for them to stay hidden. I think at a smaller player count, you've just got to be very careful with how you play. You don't want to be too bad too soon, because I have had games where the bad guys just give themselves away a bit too easily, and the other players have kind of solved it, and you're sort of like, well, we've kind of won this, guys, now. So you've got to be a bit more careful in a smaller count. I personally not that fussed about the theme, and I would say that it's on the longer side of a social deduction game. I found it to be longer than Avalon or Secret Hitler, but certainly shorter than something like Dark Moon, just because you are playing through a fair few villains, and there's more to consider in terms of playing the cards and the different special abilities that you have on these characters. I think this is a great game. If you love Marvel, then the theme really comes through, and it's got really nice comic book style artwork. And so I think I can highly recommend this one. And if you like Marvel, you should definitely check it out. That's Hail Hydra. Men at Work is a dexterity game from Pretzel Games, who made my favorite dexterity game of all time. That's Junkart. And you can kind of tell because Junkart is a beautiful, very brightly coloured masterpiece of bits of wood, and Men at Work is a similar thing. What you're trying to do is collaboratively build a construction site. And so on your turn, you will flip a card and you'll be told by the card on the deck whether to place a girder, one of these big bits of wood, or to place a construction worker. And the card will then tell you what you have to do with that construction worker. So if I was to place a girder, I would have to touch 2 other colours. So I've got this black one here, and let's say one hand only, I have to touch a white and a purple. But if I was to have placed a construction worker, I would take one of these really cute wooden meeples that have these plastic hard hats on that you can actually take off. And this needs to be placed with a beam, which is these tiny bits of wood. So I place this somewhere on a girder and then place this beam on his shoulder, trying to balance it. And of course, I failed. So what you're trying to do is not make any mistakes on your turn. If you make a mistake, you lose a safety certificate. And if you lose all 3 of your safety certificates, then you're out of the game. The way you win the game is by getting these Employee of the Month certificates. About a quarter of the way through the game, this card will show up. This is Rita. She is the in charge of the construction site, and she's actually the designer of the game as well. And when she's out, you now want to place your girders and construction workers so that they're at the highest most point of the construction site. So you're trying to place, let's say here, and that's like the highest one from then onwards. But then, so then you would win an Employee of the Month. But it's the next person's turn. They also want to win one of these certificates because you need to get a certain amount to win the game. And they have to place a girder. So how are they going to place a girder so that they can go higher than that worker that was just placed? Maybe on his shoulder? So that you can see that it's quite tricky. And I love that it's giving you that challenge to always push yourself. It's not just about placing things on the construction site. It's forcing you to do things that are really ambitious and very dangerous and very likely for everything to collapse. I love the theme of this one. It really comes out in the way that it looks on the table. And there's something dark and funny about it all just collapsing. And the next person's job is to clean up the construction site. So if I make a mistake, I lose a certificate. The next person has to clean up after me. And they're given this little tool here. And they have to hook out these what seem to be dead construction workers from the ruins of the site and clean it up so that they can then take their turn. There's just something that makes everyone laugh about that theme. And I think that this game is perfect for a spectacle game. If you play this at a board game cafe or at your games club, everyone's going to be looking over. I think it's great for families, for kids, because it just looks so wonderful on the table and has such a sort of fun factor. I am personally like a connoisseur of dexterity games. I've played a lot and I really enjoy playing this one, but it isn't quite like in the top tier of dexterity games for me. I love Junkart. Watch my top 10 Christmas gifts video to learn why. That's very different to this one. I would compare this to something like Catch the Moon because it also has the desire to place your pieces at the highest most point and that sort of gamble nature. The reasons that maybe this one's not quite for me is that I feel like it's incredibly hard, which means that things fall over a lot, especially when you're pushing yourself to be really ambitious. And I love a game that really kind of builds up to a climax. And this one, you tend not to get that high because of the challenges that the cards give you. And because you're always trying to push to get the highest thing, it's going to collapse a lot, which means it doesn't really ever kind of build into this massive monstrosity. I do really like the variant that uses this crane. And the reason I love that is because you can then balance stuff off of it, except it's not easy. And that will help you be more ambitious with reaching the highest point. The other thing is that, especially when you don't play with the crane, you can have cards that come up where you feel like it's almost impossible to be able to place the highest piece. So that you're having a turn and you won't be able to win the Employee of the Month award, no matter how hard you try that turn. I love the theme of it. The artwork is great. I think it's a really great dexterity game, and I think there will be people out there that absolutely love this. And I think in many ways it's a perfect package of a dexterity game and is a lot more attractive than something like Catch the Moon. But as a real fan of them, it wasn't like in my top tier, but I would highly recommend it. So check out Men at Work. Reykjol is a worker placement game from designer Uwe Rosenberg, who designed Agricola and Caverna. The reason that I was attracted to this is because it's a bit lighter than those games. It's more of an entry-level Uwe Rosenberg worker placement game. And I really like the theme and the artwork on this. He's generally has the same artist for a lot of his games, and I really like the style of this one. The theme is that you're in Iceland and you're growing vegetables. So it's a farming thing. You're growing vegetables in greenhouses. I believe it's using the geothermal energy. And so you are building these greenhouses represented by cards, and then you'll be seeding vegetables in them, like a tomato. And then the entire greenhouse will be filled up with tomatoes, and then you'll be harvesting those tomatoes and using them. And what you're trying to do in the game is you're trying to feed tourists. So you'll go through your actions. You only have 3 workers. You'll place them down onto these spots on the board that are always the same when you play. So there's not loads to get your head round. And as you get to know the game, you'll sort of be a lot quicker with it. And once you've placed all your actions, you will harvest from your greenhouses where you've got some vegetables in them. And then you are trying to feed these tourists. So around the board is this track. It's really a race. And you've got this bottle here representing your color. And you will be paying the vegetables to the bank to feed the tourists. So here it wants a tomato, then a lettuce, then a mushroom, then a cauliflower, then a carrot. Then it wants 2 tomatoes, 2 lettuces, 2 mushrooms. So you know ahead of time what you're going to need. And I really like that because it gives you an objective to focus on. It makes the game quite easy to understand because you can just teach someone and be like, well, look, this is what you're going to need. And so you know that when you're here, you're like, oh, wow, I need really to get some lettuces and some mushrooms. And you can be thinking ahead for the other things. And I like that because it fits the theme of farming, of planning. The idea that, okay, in like a couple of seasons time or whatever the time frame is with this, you are going to need 3 cauliflowers. Well, maybe I should get the greenhouse for that now, start seeding them, and then I can be harvesting enough. You're limited in what you can harvest. You will always be able to harvest 1 vegetable from each of your greenhouses every round. But that's not that much, especially when towards the end of the game, you're going to be needing like 5 tomatoes. So you can also do extra harvesting by using your workers, and there are actions on this board that allow for harvesting. It's a really nice touch that all of the vegetables in this game are shaped as they would be, really nice wooden pieces. And on top of that, I love these cardboard trays that you keep them in because they're thematic, but they help you organize it on the table and they look really nice. I expect there isn't enough depth and variability for people that love Agricola and Caverna, but I think that's what's so great about this one is that it is targeted at a slightly different audience, and I think it really hits that audience well by being simple, but still giving you those tough decisions about how you're going to strategize. There's loads of planning. You really will screw yourself over if you make bad decisions. And just like any worker placement game, you are blocking other people from taking actions, so you can see what other people might be wanting to do and make sure that you get there first. These service cards give you a bit more to think about. They are really powerful special abilities. There's 1 action on the board that allows you to take them, but there's also the ability to be able to share them with the neighbor to your left or right. So if somebody gets the card that you really want first, you might be able to get in there and share it with them. And if you want more depth in the game, there's a story mode that will basically twist the rules a little bit, add in very small elements here and there to just change the dynamic of the game. So that you can play through kind of like a campaign and every game you play will be slightly different. I really like the theme of this. I think that it plays really nicely. I personally am just finding that I crave a bit more interaction and a bit less solo time in my head from board games, and this one's a bit too much of a Euro game for me. But I think if you like Euro games, maybe you're looking for one to introduce your friends to before you take them up to the next level, or maybe you're new to it yourself, then I would recommend Rakehole. Bad Bones is a tower defense game from Sit Down Games, the makers of Magic Maze. And that's one of the reasons I was excited to try it at Essen this year. The idea is that you are in this snowy place. There are skeletons coming at you from all sides of these forests, and they are trying to destroy your tower in the middle here with these nice plastic pieces. And they are also going to attack your village at the bottom, represented by these little houses. So if you ever lose all of your bits of the tower or all of your houses, then you are out, but the game immediately ends. So there's no player elimination, which I really like. It's about trying to survive the longest, and you are competing with other players. They've all got their own stuff going on with their own board, exactly like this, and their own skeletons coming at them. And it's about how you solve that tower defense puzzle, about how you kill the skeletons most efficiently. You're trying to survive longer than the other players, and that's how you win. So what's so clever is just that you don't have to really think about the admin of the skeletons moving. There's no rolling dice, there's no flipping cards. You just draw a bunch of skeletons each round because it gets more and more intense, just like a tower defense game should. And when these skeletons come out, they're going to be in your graveyard here at the top. You are just going to place them matching the color that's on them. So this one is a red, and you can see the artwork. He's sort of walking that way from left to right. So you would just place it here on the red arrow that matches. And this one would go here because it's green and it's pointing down, and yellow. And so a couple of seconds to place them in, and then they all move. And so you just move them one space and then flip them so that they turn from white to black. And so that is just helping you track which ones you move and which ones you haven't moved. Once you've moved them all, that's it. That's all of the stuff. So this one here is coming into the tower, and so it would destroy this tower unless the hero is there. So you have a few bits in your arsenal against these skeletons to be able to try and hold them back and stop you from losing the game. Mainly is your hero. This is just one miniature that you have, and every round you can move him once in any direction. Wherever you move him to, he destroys all the skeletons that are there. So what you really would love to do is collect the skeletons into one spot, send the hero there, and kill everything on it. They all go back in the bag, and your forest is cleared. But the fact that he moves that slowly is just a bit frustrating, or it's just very hard, because he could be down here and you've got loads of skeletons in this corner, and it's going to take him lots of turns to get there. That is, of course, the nature of the game, and that's part of the puzzle that you have to solve. The other thing that you have are these traps. So you've got a catapult, a brick wall, a dragon, and a bunch of money or treasure. The catapult is cool because it interacts with the other players in the game. If you place a catapult, when the skeletons move, when they move onto it, they will fly off, and you can then decide whose other forest they get placed on, whose other board. So you can give it to another player. So you're getting rid of the problem and sending it somewhere else. Of course, they will be sending them to you, and they end up in your graveyard, and then at the end of the round, you place them on. The wall allows you to change direction of these skeletons. So if they walk into it, they will then change direction, and then the wall gets used. And it's same for the catapult. You have to flip them over. If they then get used again before you take them off the board, they're out. They're dead. They're wasted. But if you're able to take it off the board, it refreshes, and then when you can place it back on, it's new again. And you really want to be doing that because you want to use them as many times as possible. So the wall allows you to change direction. And the reason you want to do that is because you want to point the skeletons away from your tower, away from the houses, maybe into a position where your hero can kill them, or send them back into the forest. If you send them into the forest on either side, if I send it this side, it would go to the players on this side. If I send it that way, it would go to the player on that side. If I send it through the top, I can choose which other player it goes onto. And there is an element of looking at other people's players' boards, seeing who's doing the best, and maybe trying to hold them back a bit. But what I would say is that the game does lack interaction because you are very much focused on what you're doing. It's nice to have those bits with the catapult where you're throwing it onto other people, but it doesn't feel like a big part of the game. You're mostly just doing it to get rid of stuff. And that's the whole game, really. You move your hero once. You can either place a trap or remove a trap. So often you obviously want to be placing traps because they're really useful, but you really want to be removing them at the right times as well, or otherwise you won't get to use them again because they'll just get completely destroyed. Then you move all of the skeletons once, and then you draw more skeletons to make it worse, and you go round again. And it's so simple to follow. You can pick this game up in 2 minutes, and you're never having to check any rules or worry about anything. And it really moves at a good pace because the decisions are important, but I don't feel like you really get caught up in loads of AP. Of course, you are having to wait for everyone else at the table to go at the same time, but I haven't found the game to go slow, even when playing it with 4 players. What's great about this is that actually, because you're all playing at the same time, there is no downtime, and the game box, you can play this up to 6 players, which is really nice that they've put that much content into it, and it's a really, really heavy box. The other thing is that you can play an advanced version, which gives you these coins that you can then use to buy certain traps, and there's a whole array of different traps that you can be used in different ways. And I like that they're giving you that depth. Very much like with Magic Maze, their other game, you can get into this game in an instant, but then there's still stuff to get into further down the line once you're bored maybe of the basic game or you just want to step up. You can also play this game cooperatively where you've all got your board and then there's houses in the middle and you're trying to stop the skeletons from getting into the middle, and you flip this board and there's paths about the way the skeletons move, and they're all going to be sent there, and you're desperately trying to stop them. I found that cooperative game to be quite hard. But really, I've also found it to not have the interaction that I would like from a co-op game, because you are still pretty much just focused on your own thing. And to me, that's the only downside of Bad Bones, is just that you're focused on your own board pretty much the whole time. There's a little bit of interaction, but it's not quite what I would hope for. And I think it is an incredible simulation of a tower defense game. It is really stressful. It does really ramp up. And there's loads to think about with such a cool system. But I am just mostly thinking about my board, and I would rather a more social game, personally. But if you want a tower defense game, I don't think there's a better one out there. It's got nice artwork, and you can play it up to 6 players. That is Bad Bones. God Hates Charades is a twist on charades where you are playing a character or a famous person such as Vladimir Putin and then trying to act out a scenario such as eating an entire cake in one sitting. You've got 30 seconds for your friends to guess what you're doing. But the interesting twist, and the reason I was excited to try this, is that you can say things in this game. You can act it out and say stuff. You just can't say what's on the card. So you could be doing a Russian accent and making noises of eating a cake, and your friends are trying to guess this very specific thing. You do have a bit of leeway in terms of if they get the gist of it, they don't have to say the exact thing. And I really like the idea of that. But what I found in practice is that it's even more daunting for people than doing charades. And I think it requires a fair amount of effort to really get into a character, to sort of improv lines, but also maybe do voices. And just not everyone's going to be up for it. The other thing with this is that they're trying to appeal to the Cards Against Humanity generation. So you've got these edgy cards like collecting all their pubic hair into a jar and snorting cocaine with a crazy straw. And it's not overtly offensive like maybe Cards Against Humanity can be, but it's just sort of this lame teenage sense of humor. And I prefer games where we create the sense of humor. Like, I don't mind being crude in a game and often am in party games, but I don't want the game to be doing it. I kind of want us to be pitching it, because what are the chances that the game is going to have the same sense of humor as your group of friends? And when I brought this out in front of my friends, there was just so many cards that made them cringe, and I felt embarrassed being the person that owned this game. So it wasn't one for me, this one. I did really like the twist of combining two things, having a very specific thing you're having to act out and getting to say things out loud. But actually in practice, I don't think there's many groups that would necessarily click with it. So nice try, but wasn't quite right. That's God Hates Charades. Incoherent is a party game that I picked up at Essen. This is from Capstone Hong Kong. They made a game that I loved last year called Scribble Time, which is in my top 10 party games of last year. Definitely go check that one out. This one is quite a silly guessing game where you are having to make up a story and replace the word in the story that you're trying to get the players to guess by saying something else. The best way for me to describe it really is to show you. So I would be assigned a word, let's say remote control, and then I'm assigned a replacement word or phrase. In this instance, it's what's up. And then the other players will tell me how to start my story. So for example, it might be when I was young. So I would just start telling a story and the other players are listening in. And I'm saying, when I was young, I would always fight over the what's up with my brother. He would want to watch The Simpsons and I really wanted to watch Hollyoaks. That isn't true, by the way. And so I would always hide the what's up in the sofa cushions and he would never know where it was. And then one day he found it. Anyway, I'm not going to carry on. I think you might have got it by that point. And so the other players are trying to race to guess it. They have these tokens. They throw them into the box lid and then they get a chance to guess it. So I would stop my story. They would guess it. If they get it right, it's over. They get a point. I get a point. Or if they don't get it right, I just carry on telling the story. I played this one with Ashlee, Board Gamer Girl, on Instagram in Essen, and we had a real blast with it. And yet somehow since, I've just found it to be not quite as funny as the first time. Like it's really good the first time you play it, and then it's had diminishing returns. Part of that is I've found that it's quite easy to get to the point in your story where people guess it. So you don't have to sort of say this ridiculous story where you're having to replace the word every time you say it that many times. And that's really what can be funny about it, is hearing people tell this story and saying this weird thing, and it generally just sounds really odd. The other thing is that players generally can kind of shortcut to saying the right thing. You'll be given the start of a story, when I was young, or I saw it in my dream last night. And it's very hard for players to not just immediately jump to something. So if you're saying, we had one where it was like, you wake up in the middle of a forest, but let's say you're wanting to talk about remote control. Instinctively, because you're playing against a timer and sometimes you're rushing against another player, you just go, oh, I woke up in a forest and I thought about the other day when I was drinking this, and suddenly the forest is just completely out of the way and the story doesn't make any sense because it's a silly party game as it is, and your brain just naturally kind of goes the quickest route. Nobody's really questioning that, but it kind of defeats the point of having that story in the first place. One of the modes of the game is that you're going head to head, telling a story, trying to get people to guess your word whilst someone else is doing it at exactly the same time. So you have this little spinner here which will tell you whether you're in battle mode or playing on your own. And it's as chaotic as it sounds. I am literally doing what I just did about the remote control and someone else is doing it about a different word, and you're trying to listen to both at the same time. And that again is fun for the first couple of times, really chaotic, but it lends itself to being much better for the person who can just talk louder. Or as a listener, you just find yourself, you have to only focus on one and you zone out the other. And so really you're helping the player that you focus on because the other player is being completely ignored. And it comes down to a 50-50 pick, really. You can't do both at the same time. So you just pick one and then you're going to guess theirs first. And so the other player isn't going to get the point that round. So I really like the idea of this. It was trying something different. I think that kids would probably love it because it is so silly. But for playing it with adults, I just would prefer to play other silly party games. This one didn't really have the longevity. That is Incoherent. Santa Maria is a midweight Euro game from Aporta Games, who made Avenue, which is a game that I love. And I'd heard loads of people raving about this one, so even though it was a strategy game, I thought I would give it a try. The theme is that you're setting up colonies. I wouldn't really say that the theme does much for me, but I also would say that it doesn't really come through much in the gameplay. What you have with the gameplay is a real puzzly nature of how to use your resources best. So you've got these dice. The white dice are available to everyone, and when you take one, you will activate everything you have in a column. And when you have blue dice, you will activate everything in a row matching the number. You're building up this board, and you'll be getting more and more actions in your columns and rows, and you are trying to activate these different buildings to get resources. You've got these wooden tokens that represent grain and wood and gems, to get money, to go further up on tracks that are in the main board of the game. It's all about trying to get points in the most efficient way. But I found it's really satisfying the way that you have to decide what to do with your dice. Like, you might only have a 5 blue, but you really want to do this shipping thing up here. Well, you could spend a coin just to use that building, or you could spend a bunch of coins to maybe change one of the dice that's available in the center, which would then allow you to use that column, because then you'd get what's at the bottom here as well. There's a lot of depth to this game in terms of there's goals that you can aim towards, there's special abilities that you can buy which will make you stronger at certain things. There's the different tracks. The Conquistador track is going to get you a bunch of points if you're furthest up it compared to the other players. The religion track is going to allow you to get these monks out, which will give you more abilities. There's loads to think about, and yet I didn't find it very hard to grasp. I tend not to play these types of games that often, but I found that I was in it quite quickly after having read the rulebook. I didn't think that there was loads of complexity, and the rulebook was well written, and I found myself enjoying this game almost despite my taste. There's something really satisfying about the way you make decisions. You can plan when it's not your turn, what you're going to want to do, and you're really trying to find the best time to do certain things. You need to get these resources to be able to build more tiles, to then get those resources, which you then need to ship, which will then get you more points. There's lots going on, but I found it not that complicated to get my head around, and quite fascinating, really. Ultimately, it does come down to the fact that there isn't loads of interaction in this game. You're very much focused on your own board, and so I don't think it's a game that I'm going to want to come back to, but I really can appreciate it. And if somebody was looking for a midweight Euro game which has really satisfying decisions, then I would definitely recommend Santa Maria. And it's one of those Euro games that I could imagine playing again. I'm not going to be asking for it. It's not going to stay on my shelf. But when you compare it to all the other ones that I've tried, this is definitely high up the ranks for me as one that I found really satisfying. So that is Santa Maria. Those are the board games I've been playing lately. I've put links to where you can buy all of them in the description below. I'm Jon Purkis. Thanks for watching.